In this lesson, we're going to write our first unit test using Jest and VueTest utils. You can download the starting code below this video, or if you're interested in seeing how I created this through the Vue CLI, you can follow these steps. To create this project, I ran vue create, then gave the project a name of unit testing Vue, then manually selected features, because we want to be testing Vue Router, Vuex, and of course we're doing unit testing, so I selected that. I said yes to hash history mode, and I selected ESLint plus prettier, lint on save, and this is quite important. For unit testing, I selected Jest, then dedicated config files, and I did not save this as a preset. And of course, then this will create our project. So let's take a look at what was created for us. Touring the starting code, we see we have our src directory, which you should be familiar with from previous projects. And this tests unit directory was created for us. We'll take a look at that in a second. Also, I did add this prettier rc.js file just because I prefer single quotes and no semicolons. That is totally up to you if you want to use that or not. We have our Jest config file. And then in our package.json file, I want to bring your attention to this test unit command. This command will run the tests that live in our test unit directory here. So let's take a look at what is in that directory. We have an example test, and we're going to ignore really what's going on here because I want to show you what happens when we run that command in the terminal. So we'll say npm run test unit, and we'll see that it is running that example spec.js file, and we see that it passes, and it gives us further information about that test. Now let's add a new component and write some tests for it. We'll head into our src folder, dive into components, and we'll delete out this hello world component. And we'll add an app header.vue file. And I'm going to paste in some code. This should look familiar from the previous lesson. It's a simple app header which displays a logout button whenever our logged in data is true. Now we want to build a test for this, so we'll delete out this example spec file and create a file called appheader.spec.js. In case you're wondering, spec here stands for specification because we're specifying how the component ought to behave. When we run that npm test unit command, it's going to look in our test unit directory and then run all those files with spec in their file name. So we'll build out our tests soon, but I want to head back into the app header component so we can get an idea of what we should be testing within here. Our input is the logged in data, and our output is the logout button. When that data is false, we are not displaying that button. So that's the first test. If user is not logged in, do not show logout button. On the other hand, when logged in is true, we should be showing the button. So our second test is if the user is logged in, show the logout button. So let's start writing these tests. We'll head back into our spec file and import app header because we need to be testing it. And then I'm going to write describe. This is a Jest function that creates a block of tests, also known as a test suite. Inside of here, we're going to write our test. So we'll use the Jest function called test. Then we'll pass in a string that specifies what the test should test. And then the second argument is a function that actually is run for that test. Here, we're writing out the logic about our expected outcome for the test. So we'll use the Jest function called expect, which creates an assertion about that expected outcome. And inside of this function, we're going to put in the value to apply matchers against. And to keep things super simple for now, I'm just going to put true, and then I'll write to be. This is a Jest matcher that checks that the value is what we expect it to be. So we expect it to be true, so I'm going to pass in true. So obviously what I just wrote isn't testing what we want it to, but I wanted to keep it very simple so I wasn't introducing too many concepts at a time. And also, if you do these steps and write a test that you know is going to pass and then it fails, then you know you set something up wrong elsewhere. So it serves as a sanity test to start out with. While 2B is a common Jest matcher, there are other common matchers which you can check out in the Jest documentation, and we'll cover a few more of those in further lessons. Now I'm going to copy this and paste it so we can start to write our second test, where if the user is logged in, show the logout button. Now let's run these tests to make sure that they are passing and we have set everything up correctly. Great, and they have indeed passed. So far so good. Now we can write the actual testing logic to set up these tests. But first, in order to actually perform these tests, we need the app header component to be mounted. So up here, we'll import mount from viewTestUtils. Now I'll create a const called wrapper, and that will mount our app header. The reason we're calling this wrapper is because in addition to mounting this component, it wraps it, giving us access to functions that help us test the component. So our first step is to use that wrapper to find the element that we're looking for, in this case, the button. And we want to see if it is visible or not. So this will return a Boolean. And in this case, because we do not have a user logged in, we should not be showing the logout button. So we expect to find the button to not be visible. Now we can copy this code and paste it into our second test, where if the user is logged in, we should be showing the button, so we expect this to be true. Now if we run these tests, let's see what happens. Uh-oh, we're getting a lot of error messages here, and if we scroll up, we see that we had a test fail. If user is logged in, show logout button. We expected true, but we received false. Why? By default, our app header's logged in data value is false. We haven't done anything to change that, but viewTestUtils gives us that power. So let's do that now. So if we say wrapper, then use the method setData, we can change logged in to true. Now when we run these tests, they both should pass. So let's check that out. Great, they both are passing just like we expected them to. We just did a lot, so let's review the steps we just took. First, we create a test suite, also known as a block of tests, using the Jest describe method. As a side note here, if you only have one test, you don't really have to use the describe block. This is most helpful if you have multiple tests and you want to organize them within the same test block. Second, we set up our tests using the Jest test function. And instead of using test, we could also use it. You'll see both of those used out in the wild. The third step we took was to mount the component using viewTestUtils, this giving us the wrapper with those helpful functions to test the component. And fourth, we needed to set the data, updating that logged in value. Finally, we asserted what we expect the result to be. Obviously, step 4 might be different depending on the component and what inputs you're testing. You could be updating props, for example. And we'll be covering how to test different kinds of components in future lessons. See you there.
And passing a string that details the test. Yeah, I don't want to say describes, because that I want to say describes that, but that specifies. And we'll pass in a string that specifies what we expect the test to how we expect the test to, like. So the test asserts, but it's not like the thing specifically that's asserting. I want to keep the phrasing very that specifies how the test should